Hello and welcome everyone to the month of March project showcase from India Foundation for the Arts. As some of you know, India Foundation for the Arts, or IFA, is an organization that's nationwide, independent, and supports and implements projects in the arts and culture across the country. We've been around doing this for about 25 years, having supported and implemented over 700 such projects. The outcomes of these projects across various disciplines, regions, languages are out there in the public domain as books, films, archival material, performances, productions, seminars, conferences to enrich your understanding and love for the arts and culture. But other than supporting and implementing these projects, what we also like doing is sharing the process and the outcomes of some of these projects that the incredible artists, researchers, teachers, and scholars take on. Before the pandemic, before March 2020, we would actually have these conversations in different cities across the country, go there, co-host it with a local partner, make an evening out of it with some chai coffee, and discuss these projects with you. But since March 2020, we have moved that whole process online. And now every month we come to you sharing one such project. And these projects are from across IFA's programs, and our grantees and project coordinators live across the country in different parts. So today we have something very special for you from the Archival and Museums Fellowships that we had. And we are going to share this project, and my colleague Suman will tell you a little more about it soon. But just a few house rules. There's a chat box and you can put in your comments, suggestions in the chat box. We will also be sharing a little more information about today's happening in the chat box with some links if possible. But if you have Q&A questions for today's speakers, you can put that in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, because that will help us collate those questions and take it at the end of the presentation. If you are listening to this on Zoom, then these are your instructions. But if you're following us on the live stream on our Facebook page and have questions, then you can put them down as comments, and somebody from IFA will share those with us and we'll be able to address those. So that is how the evening is going to look. Thank you so much for being here. And may I introduce my colleague Suman Gopinath, who looks after the Archival and Museum program now, to tell you a little bit about it and also introduce you to today's speakers. Hey, Suman.
Thank you, Arundhati, and thank you all for being here this evening. To begin with, I would like to tell you a little bit about our Archives and Museums program, under which Bhavin Shukla, who's a speaker today, received a fellowship. The objective of our Archives and Museums program is to open up collections in archives and museums through imaginatively curated interventions by creative practitioners, scholars, and others. As all of you are aware, museums and archives in our country have wonderful collections and material, but we seldom get to see them or have access to them. So our program hopes to make these institutions dynamic spaces for creativity, research, and practice. For more details about our project, do have a look at our website. For this particular project, which took place in 2017, we collaborated with the Delhi Visual Archive at the Center for Community Knowledge at the Ambedkar University in Delhi, which is an interdisciplinary research center that works in partnership with local individuals and organizations. Their overarching aim is to facilitate a dialogue between knowledge emerging from marginalized communities and the mainstream. As part of their endeavor, the center is working towards building an archive of visual history of Delhi over the 19th and 20th centuries. The photographs in the archive have been sourced from personal holdings and amateur photographers in Delhi. But what's really interesting, however, is that this collection goes beyond the popular images of monuments and landmarks to see lives, livelihoods, professions, street life, festivity, and other happenings in the city. So, of course, you'll hear more about it from Surajit Sarkar, who is the first presenter of the evening. He's Associate Professor and Coordinator of the Center for the Community Knowledge and is one of the founders of the archive. In his presentation called Dialogues with Memory, Surajit will speak about the origins of the archive, its content, and the different ways in which the archive has been used. Surajit's presentation will be followed by Bhavin Shukla, who will speak about the exhibition that grew out of the photographs in the archive. Bhavin is an architect and an educator based in Ahmedabad. His exhibition, Delhi Dialogues, a conversation between people and the city, was first shown in Delhi, and then it moved to Ahmedabad. You'll hear more about the exhibition from Bhavin himself. But before I invite Surajit and Bhavin to make their presentations, I would like to thank the Tata Trusts for supporting this project. Over to you, Surajit.
Hello, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Surajit Sarkar from Center for Community Knowledge, Ambedkar University, Delhi. And I'm really thankful to the IFA for actually helping us take what we were seeing as a collection of photographs into a kind of a space and a direction which has made it what it is today, including bringing it online amongst many things. But let me just share my presentation with you, and let's start from there. One second. Oops, what's happening? I hope everyone can see this presentation.
Yes.
All right.
Surajit, you're on mute. You're on mute. Surajit, you're on mute.
Surajit, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yes, so we couldn't hear anything from the beginning. Actually.
Yeah, you've got to go back to your first.
Yeah.
Right.
Doing that, but there's something getting stuck at this end. Oh. Oops, sorry. Yeah, okay. Sorry for all the mess up here. Something happened to my machine, but so dialogues with memory. It's a dialogue with actually the city of Delhi, people, how they remember the city, how they have kind of got photographs of the city, have imagined the city, have had described the city to people who are maybe, as you can see here, probably much younger than them. And this dialogue is not just a beginning and end, a one-time conversation, because as this photograph itself shows, it's a photograph we got first in around 2014, but about 2015, a year later, the contributors who shared this photograph said that, can you not use this photograph in your archive, please? Not because we don't like it, but because we don't want the faces of the women who are playing badminton there. These women are playing badminton in a Haveli in Old Delhi, a Haveli that doesn't exist anymore. A brief glimpse into life and times inside a Haveli of Old Delhi in about the year 1950 to 60. So we've done this presentation with a photograph that came to us and has since disappeared. How we let that happen is because when we started this conversation with the city called Delhi Ki Yaadein, it was a process of just trying to understand who lives in Delhi, What do they remember of the city when they see around them? What can they tell us about the changes in the city? Part of it came out from the fact that unlike the other big cities in this country, Mumbai, Chennai, Hyderabad, Kolkata, Delhi doesn't have much of a kind of archived historical background besides what is called, the Shahjahanabad, the old city of Delhi, the monumental part of the city. Besides the monument, and when we're talking about the monumental city, we are only talking about in 1947, 500,000 people. That was all. Today, it's a city of almost anywhere between 17 to 20 million. Most of these people have not been born in the city, but where have they come from? Why are they here? I mean, and they're not all partition refugees. So what are they? How do they live? How do they kind of convert what is essentially village commons and farmlands for about 400 odd villages into part of the megapolis of today, the mega city of today. So in order to do that, we started off with the process of actually calling elders to old timers in the city who've lived here for a long time. And the two people you see in this photograph are important. The person on the left who's holding the mic is R.V. Smith, a chronicler of the city of Delhi. He came to Delhi in, I think, the year 1930 or in the early 30s, and lived here till about 2015 when he passed away, 2015 or 2017. And he had a regular column in the Hindu on Delhi for about 40 years, 35 to 40 years, and a font of information on this old city, including its legends, lores, the different kind of people, and so on and so forth. The person on the right is Narayan Prasad, the person whose photographs actually helped us build the Delhi Visual Archive. And so the beginnings, this photograph you see is the old iron bridge, which is a road cum rail bridge across Delhi, across the Yamuna in Delhi, built in late, I think, 1870s to connect Delhi to Kolkata via Allahabad. And this is a picture from, I think, 1930s, late 1930s, but you never see this bridge this empty. And it kind of, anyone who sees this photograph says, this is completely unimaginable that this bridge, the oldest bridge across the Yamuna, could even look like this at some point. Even if you go there at 2 in the morning, you don't see it like this anymore. So meeting Narayan Prasad started off on our journey to collect these photographs. Through him, we got almost about 1,500 photographs. Photographs which he got from 1938 onwards. Besides that, he also gave us photographs from his family's collection, which were not all taken by him. For example, the photograph in 1931, top right of this slide, is about a marriage party at the Chelmsford Club of the old city bankers and the local Delhi elite. If you notice this, the way they are dressed and the way they are sitting, it's not how marriages happened maybe in other parts of Delhi as well in 1931. But it's kind of an indication about how the elite were kind of accommodating with the British who were by this time at the capital city of Delhi. Remember, Delhi became announced as the capital in 1911 and became the de facto capital by about 1921 onwards. What we call Rashtrapati Bhavan and all was built by 1931. So this is the time when all the kind of English elite and the Indian elite have moved to Delhi. Delhi's become like the national capital. And unfortunately, the problem of Delhi is becoming the national capital, the national kind of overrides the local in a very, very big way. And what we've tried to do in the Delhi Visual Archive is to collect the Delhi local, get images of the Delhi local as part of it. I mean, one of the other things we're doing at the center is actually doing this Delhi Memory Project, which is essentially interviews from the city of Delhi, life histories from the city of Delhi. We have about 450 interviews so far, being used in a variety of ways already. Some of it, maybe you'll see more in the years to come if you follow us. Here there's an inter-school wrestling competition here. It's at the commercial high school in Old Delhi for the commercial trophy, telling you exactly the connection between old elite, the trading classes, and modernity. 1956, a barber shop. Many of you would have been familiar with scenes like this from across the country, but we don't see it in Delhi anymore. Even in rural Delhi, you move to a saloon. So these are the kind of images about the transition from a different kind of Delhi to today that our archive has. Part of our archives is actually also from outsiders who've been living in the city. The person on the top, Gossi Soto, started off being a student in Delhi University in Miranda House in the year 1950 for 3 years, and then went on to become a journalist, first in the Mexican embassy, then back in Mexico, then came back to Delhi, and has given us a set of almost about 100 photographs which kind of show the way she was seeing the city, not just from Republic Day parade, but also about marriages, shadis, fashion parades, and so on and so forth. Howard Rawson, an Australian in Delhi, 68 to 70, was a scientist at the Indian Agricultural Research Institute. But he lived in what was just the fast growing part of Delhi, West Delhi at that time. And he was struck by many of the things that were, he was struck, being a scientist, he was struck by the whole idea of jugaad. For example, here he talks about a peanut vendor converting a baby pram into a cart for his peanuts. Now, we have got so used to seeing some of this that it doesn't kind of register with us anymore. And sometimes having an outsider's eye does help. And we know this. I'm just moving on to other people from Delhi who've given us photographs. These are old-time residents of the city who have just been using the city spaces in different ways. Clockwise from the top, there are 2 photographs from Mohammed Tawhir from Mehroli here. The top left photograph is of a building in Mehroli you just don't see, called Phansi Ghar. Except that Phansi Ghar doesn't exist. And when we asked Tawhir, all we got was the hillock on which the Phansi Ghar was, approximately. I mean, he was also talking about something that had happened 35 years ago, 30 years ago. So then a little more asking around, when we track down that Pahadi is now the place where the Ahimsa Sthal is being created in the 1990s. A complete shift in the use of actually the landscape of the city. Similarly, top right, a photograph from 1940, a rooftop view from a Barsati in Old Delhi of Jama Masjid. You don't get views like this anymore. Similarly, the photo below, also from Mohammed Tawhir, the color photograph from 1990. People who lived in Mehroli had an equation with the monuments around them, which is of a very easygoing, yet protective and part of their family. Nowadays, when you see all these monuments all kind of barricaded, you don't, it's the most common complaint by the old timers in Delhi is all these monuments have been cut off from us. We just have no way of getting there. And then Brahm Sarup Snatak lived in Nizamuddin, was a teacher in the school you see behind under a tent called the Quetta DAV school. And the year was 1965, the year of Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, the Indo-Pakistan War. And in his school, despite living off tents, all the school grinds, they were growing wheat, and here are the teacher and the students in the middle of the new wheat crop. Can't imagine stuff like that happening in Delhi today. Once we get these collections at the Center for Community Knowledge, we believe that we can't just share the collection with others without sharing with the contributors. And that's very, very much an intrinsic part of the process. We have what is called the neighborhood musing process. So at least one place in town a year, one locality, one neighborhood, one mohalla, we do this neighborhood museum there. Photograph is from Nizamuddin. Some of the photographs you see in the panels behind. We also have this map down there, which essentially got visitors to come and kind of stamp places I love, places I'd like to go again, places I hate, places I don't want to go to, or places I would really like to go, but I haven't got there yet. Within the neighborhood, you're suddenly seeing the neighborhood in very, very different ways. There on the top right is Narayan Prasad with students at the gallery exhibition of his photographs in Mandi House called The Spirit of Delhi. And he just loved it because he was able to talk about his photographs and reminisce about them. And in the process, he also felt that the center was a great place to give his entire photo collection, which was part of the reason why we'd organized this in the first place. Similarly, Fauzan with the photograph of his family Haveli in Old Delhi, which doesn't exist anymore, and the same photograph there. And then we saw this photograph up. He said, I am not very sure that suddenly seeing it in a public place. So he went and talked to the rest of his family who were all old timers. And they said, please take the one which looks at those younger women's faces of your archive, of your kind of visible archive. You can keep it with you, but don't make it public. Whereas the photograph below was actually of the three sisters who ran the learning center in the school in the Haveli, and they didn't mind. So the archive of many of these photographs, about 1,000 or so photographs, is the delhimemories.in. Please visit. It has these photographs collected by collected by the contributors, as well as by certain narrative threads, which you will discover as you scroll through the archive. I just want to make a quick note about the contributors. So we have 10 individual contributors who in various ways have given a sizable number of photographs. And then you have the neighborhood museums as the process. We give 3 examples from here, from Shadi Pampur, Nizamuddin, and Mehroli. Each of them had some major contributors who gave about 30 or 40. But remember, photography in 1960, 80, 70, 50 was very much, you had to have money to be able to do these photographs. So some of them had a camera because they were very interested in photography. Some of them were photographers who had a photo studio. And now that we're working, our latest neighborhood museum is actually in rural Delhi this year. And we've actually located photography studios in neighboring urban centers who actually came to take photograph of villages. And we also discovered 2 very interesting sources, unusual scientists who came to look out, farming happening there. So it's agricultural scientists of some kind. And also people from the revenue, people like the civil administrators who took personal photographs of their areas under their kind of control or dominion or whatever. And they just loved that landscape. So they took photographs, and some of them we've managed to find. So I think that kind of just hopefully a very small introduction to how we've built up this collection. Thank you. I would like to stop the sharing now. Oh, sorry, 1 minute again.
Thank you, Surjit. That was a really nice introduction to your archive. And now we'll hear Bhavin tell us about the exhibition that actually grew out of some of the photographs in the archive. Bhavin.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Surajit, for outlining what the Delhi Visual Archive is. Hi, everyone. I can read some familiar names in the in the audience, and I'm sure more on Facebook. And I'll just share my screen and start the presentation. And can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So I'd like to talk about my process and my journey of curating this traveling exhibition from the collections of this archive. And I'll quickly go through the whole process and then spend some time reflecting on larger issues and challenges and learnings from this experience. So my journey begins in 2017 when the call for applications was opened by IFA, and I applied for the design and curation of a traveling physical exhibition. Once I got selected, I met Surajit and his team in Delhi at the archive, and we discussed the objectives of the physical exhibition. We wanted to create an interactive space for people, which could be a space for dialogue. The intention was to draw attention to the various aspects of everyday life that might go unnoticed. It was to showcase the various interactions between people and the city, both at the individual level and at the national level. And throughout our discussions, we were talking about where, why, and how this physical exhibition could take place. The where was clear. It was to be in public domain, not in a gallery. The everyday photographs needed to be displayed in everyday places where people have access to it, where it doesn't feel exclusive or intimidating. So we had to create a a flexible and robust, yet attractive structure that can be assembled and disassembled with ease. Something like a pop-up, temporary, travel-friendly. At the same time, it had to be robust enough to handle the Indian public space. An exhibition like this could give voice to the everyday history of the city. And somehow it feels that deep-rooted issues of identity are always tied with issues of memory, both collective and individual. And this place or this space is where these issues could be identified and discussed. Just to give you a glimpse into the kind of photographs that the archive has, it has photographs of weddings, animals, zoo visits, Republic Day parades, festivals, picnics, and much more. The political overtone of the national capital of Delhi has its reflection on the social life of the people of the city of Delhi. The who in the story of the people gets more emphasized in these photographs rather than the event. And interestingly, we don't know a lot about the people. They can be replaced, which is one of the reasons why the viewers can connect more with these photographs, even when these photographs traveled from Delhi to Ahmedabad. I initially began looking at the archive on a computer at CCK. I also tried to understand the origins of the photos from the team and from the other data that was available. The website of the Delhi Visual Archive was being built in parallel, so a lot of metadata was in process of compilation. However, this was a boon to me because I could look at every photo without a filter. Once I had the prints in my hand, I could classify them and categorize them the way I saw fit and sort of come up with common threads. Because we knew the exhibition was going to be in the public domain, we were certain we will not be dealing with originals and we will use reprints of photographs. At some point, we were also thinking of turning some two-dimensional photographs into three-dimensional dioramas, but somehow that didn't pan out. To begin the curation process and think of what narrative to put forth, I started reading about Delhi from different sources, from novels, journal articles, etc. The reading was driven by three objectives. The first was a search for an understanding of the city. The second, a narrative that could help capture these photographs. And third, the potential of the medium itself, the visual medium. I also soon realized that a lot of people have written a lot of things about Delhi, both fiction and non-fiction. And also I thought, why not use this literature as an overlay that adds a different kind of a meaning to the photographs and disassociates them from their historicity. This would evoke emotions and allow people to engage in a dialogue. Above that, instead of subscribing to one particular narrative, I thought each panel as a different layer. To quote the famous author Chimamanda Adichie, there is no single story. There is no larger classification to life in a city. It is all about the fragments, some complementing, some contradicting each other. At the same time, there were some common threads that could connect the past to the present and the people to their city. So my curatorial project was to bring these aspects together in an engaging way. In this process of curation, I feel the tackboard or the wall played a very important role. It allowed me to look at multiple photographs simultaneously, to get an overview of something which is very difficult to do on a computer screen. Once I had printed these photographs and put them on my wall, I could observe some patterns. I could draw connections to texts that I had read, almost as if the characters in the text were people in the photographs. Sometimes the texts that I had read aligned very well with the photographs. Sometimes they were in conflict. I then decided to take forward this combination of text and visual in display and come up with two major types of displays for the exhibition. The first was a single panel narrative or the single panels. And the second was the fold outs. The single panels were small stories in themselves, while the fold outs were a series of photographs describing processes that make a city. A couple of examples from the single panel format presentations. Here, the photographs were layered with a direct quote from one of the texts that I had selected. The visual of the person sitting in a basket with a back resting on an ambassador car. The text overlay is talking about migrants in Delhi, primarily daily wage workers. And the quote is, which I have sort of highlighted here, is on the side. When my sister's Nandoi, husband's sister's husband, happened to visit our village and told me how in Delhi, everyone can get a job and live much better. I got after my man to shift to Delhi. This text is from the essay Migrant Women and Urban Experience by Saraswati Heather from the book Delhi Urban Space and Human Destinies. It hints at the larger connections we have with our current situation as a result of migration. Another example, in an image of an old man playing chess with a young boy, now as an archive, we probably know where the picture was taken, which year, approximately, even who the people are in the photographs. But as a stranger viewing these photographs, the act of playing indoor games becomes more important than the people. The text reads, "There is no snow in Delhi. The winters are dry, but white winds from the snow peaks still sweep down the slopes, freezing the plains of Punjab and shattering the brittle buds before raking through the streets of the capital and brushing the narrow Delhi alleyways clear of people. The Dilliwalas withdraw into themselves." This was taken from another source, the book City of Jinns. The act of withdrawing is one that takes center stage here. It gives one an idea of the cold Delhi winter. Interestingly, just on a side note, this withdrawing act is the reason why in the English language we also call our living rooms drawing rooms. Withdrawing room becomes drawing room. The second type of display were fold outs, where pages are telling different stories or different parts of the same story. For example, in the individual and collective display, we see how people perform the same act differently, where either when one while doing individual acts of praying or spinning a charkha when they're alone versus when they're in a collective. In Building Old Delhi fold out, the duality of the tall buildings in the center of Delhi being constructed was sort of contrasted with the buildings on the periphery, where people were making their own homes with their own hands and plastering surfaces with mud plaster with their own hands. So each of the fold out had this duality inbuilt in them. The exhibition was housed in an independent structure as designed like a marketplace. The image on the left is from the archive and became a source for my design. The extensions are temporary. They provide a shade and help gather people. My design tried to borrow this understanding of a shamiana. As I'm from Ahmedabad, we made the structure in Ahmedabad, and where I could supervise the quality, clarify details with my fabricator, and then we transported the exhibition to Delhi in a truck, where we assembled it in a football field at Ambedkar University, Karampura campus, where with the help of Neil, my father, my friend, and a few colleagues who were instrumental in helping me design and assemble the whole structure, we put it up in a matter of hours. Once open, we could simply walk through the exhibition, through it, around it, stopping at whatever photograph we thought was interesting. And it was almost like a plug-in because it only needed one light source. So that was how it was designed. Along with the exhibition, we had some talks, film screenings, films like Cities of Sleep, New Improved Delhi, Ye Dilli Hai Mere Yaar were also screened at the exhibition venue. The primary audience for the screening were students because we were still inside the university campus. Some questions were posted to the viewers about their story and how they were and how they came to Delhi and where did they come from. These conversations or these pointers became starters for conversations. The evening time was when we screened most of our films and had small interactions. The exhibition in Delhi was open for approximately a week. In Ahmedabad, we changed the name from Delhi Dialogues to City Dialogues. Here, we truly went out into the public domain and set up the exhibition on the Kankaria lakefront. The exhibition was erected overnight with the help of around 10-15 volunteers. So morning walkers were surprised as to what was waiting for them. Similar tools were used to gather responses. However, here the discussion moved away from Delhi to Ahmedabad. People were very appreciative of the fact that such photographs of Delhi existed and wanted to see such photographs of Ahmedabad if they are to be found. They really liked the fact that we set up the exhibition outside a gallery so that it was accessible to everyone. The design of the exhibition was truly tested here. Kankaria Lakefront receives approximately 30,000 people daily. Yes, everyone didn't visit the exhibition, but it was absolutely wonderful to just sit and observe people and see them which photographs they liked, paused, where they took a pause, where did they linger a little longer. And what I really liked was the part that the structure blended very well with the everyday, not obstructing everyday activities, but being part of it. The conversations in Ahmedabad came up in very unexpected ways. For example, a person in Ahmedabad shared a realization that while he was just looking at the structure, that the very place that we had set it up was actually a bus stop before the redevelopment project of the lake was carried out. Listening to that, another person shared how she came to Kankaria in a bus and would have picnics at the lakefront or eat lunch in the garden in the center. In Delhi, it was more specific photos and places that people tried to identify. For example, the police officer in the left photograph in Ahmedabad was very interested in the Republic Day parade celebrations in Delhi of the past. He always wished, and he shared that he wished to attend it once and see how it is done. In Delhi, a young boy remarked that he felt that his parents' generation were more fashionable than him or his friends. As an architect, I knew that the structure had potential use for future. These images that you see are of the same structure being used for a different exhibition at a national symposium conducted by FCA in Ahmedabad are just 4 days old. The structure still works perfectly even after 4 years. And the best part is that with each exhibition, new modifications are made to the structure that cater to a different form of display. The structure was erected in absence of both me and Neil by a group of volunteers. In conclusion, I would just like to quote E.H. Carr, who in his wonderful book, What is History, talks about that history is a continuous process of interaction between the historian and his or her facts. It is an unending dialogue between the past and the present. It was this dialogue that I was trying to achieve through my small project here. I think the architecture and design has a lot to contribute to creating spaces for engaging with archives. However, it needs an interdisciplinary effort, a more collective effort. Archives are not neutral institutions or repositories. They have their own biases. But it is only through this process of engagement that we can open up discussions about society and places we live in. In the end, I would just like to thank all the wonderful people who've contributed to this wonderful project, the teams at IFA and CCK, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to also thank the volunteers who time and again helped me assemble and disassemble the structure in different places. And as part of my professional practice in future, we hope to continue to expand the scope of architecture by engaging in such projects. So that's it from my side. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Surajit, Tanvir, if you have.
Thank you, Bhavin. Thank you, Surajit. Hello, everybody. My name is Tanvir, and I'm sorry I had to put my video off because my internet connection says it's unstable. So it was wonderful. Thank you, Surajit, Bhavin. It was wonderful to see the two presentations and the insights you shared. I wanted to ask, we already have started receiving questions from the audience, and we would request our attendees to please, if they have questions, comments, they can post that in the Q&A box. And then I will relay the questions to Surajit and to Bhavin. But first of all, I wanted to begin with you, Surajit, talking about that there's a conscious attempt somewhere when you talk about to, in a way, not speaking of the archive, but you emphasize on the memory a lot. I wanted to understand that if you could give us some insight into the conceptual underpinning of the memory project and the visual archive, how it came about, what were the thoughts, what was the thinking, and what was the intention behind bringing the social, cultural, and the historical life of Delhi into the archive. And how did you deal with the question, because archives were predominantly they deal with the metadata of the material they have. So in the absence of that, this is every day where the metadata is very difficult to be culled out. What was the conceptual underpinning of all this? If you could talk deeply about this, then I have a question for Bhavin subsequent. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavin. Thank you, Tanvir. To begin with, when we started off the Delhi Memory Project, which essentially was because Ambedkar University, Delhi is a university set up with the state government, the government of the city of Delhi. And when we set up the center, one of the kind of guiding things was like, why can't the center also tell us who live in Delhi? Starting with that as a mandate, what we kind of tried to do was talk to people, meet, kind of explore their memories about what the city was like and how it changed and so on and so forth. As a part of this process, we started getting some photographs, which was useful. But the point I'm trying to make is we did not start off as a photo archive. So when we had we'd collected maybe about 50 or 100 photographs to begin with before we ran into Narayan Prasad and his collection of photographs. And suddenly the kind of collection in our hands exploded. And I started asking around, excuse me, what is an archive? What is a visual archive? How do we? So when I had to actually get into the whole business of the visual archive after receiving the photographs. So yes, issues about metadata completely unknown to us. We had to have a lot of conversations with people about other people with looking at urban archives. One of the things we still continue to have a problem is when we talk about urban archives or city archives, it's very spatial, place, building related. Whereas our photographs, as you can already have seen, are more about life that happens around the city. And it's not always possible to find out where exactly in the city it's happening until the contributor has told it to you. So it made us in a way more aware of asking these questions as we started collecting these photographs. But it's not always been possible. Let's say it's not been possible in about 20% or so of the cases. So we are still into major guesswork in those 20% at least. But having said that, it doesn't actually diminish the value of the archive, as Bhavin put it across pretty well, that sometimes the very everydayness of the archive is what makes it appealing and what catches your interest, is because you can sense yourself understanding what's happening here without knowing where. Then the second level of questioning is, why is the person doing it like that? Where in the city could it have been? But that makes you want to engage with history in a way what an interdisciplinary look at history is all about. So does that answer your question, Tanvir?
Yes, thank you. Bhavin and Surajit, I have two questions. In fact, there are multiple questions clubbed together in these two responses. One is from Shubha Srivastava. So I don't know whether it is directed to one of you or both of you, but either of you can answer this. It says, everyday life of local Delhi has been recorded through various mediums: photos, archives, videos, films, and writing. What do you think photography as a method contributes to the understanding of space that the writing doesn't? Turning it around, it is also interesting to discuss, what does writing contribute that the photographs don't? So who would want to?
Surajit,
Okay,
you want
Bhavin.
to- Me? Or should I?
Yeah, please, Bhavin, start.
Oh, no, you are the. So just to give a heads up, Surajit, you teach visual anthropology and, or at least courses or smaller sections of it. So I am nobody, I'm an architect here. But no, absolutely. I think photography as a medium has definitely very powerful, it's a very powerful tool to capture people's attention and engage. Text takes time for you to read, and it's a more abstract version. Photography is very direct in that sense, which is why it is a little more engaging. But it definitely comes with its own um, baggage or biases to a certain extent, which we might not realize. We might think that this is a very candid photograph of a city, but it might actually be a very, very staged photograph. So the fact that the way the where the camera is placed, who is the subject, and how they're photographing, and what is that relationship, also has a very different impact, which is very different from writing for that matter. So I mean, I'm just speculating on the medium of, or the power of this medium.
Surajit, would you want to say something about it?
I mean, all that I'd like to add in this is that the writing being abstract allows us, actually gives more power to the imagination. But what photographs of, in which you actually cannot, photographs of another place, for example, or photographs of actions that you're familiar with, but exactly who's doing it and why you don't know. But it's the action itself, or it's the kind of event that is something, again, which kind of makes you identify with what's happening. And at the same time, its very dissonance also allows you to build a level of abstraction into it. And this kind of visual abstraction, in a sense, complements what writing is trying to do to the imagination, or what writing does to the imagination. And I think it goes pretty well together. They are similar, but they are similar in some ways, but only in some ways. It's actually triggering very different elements inside your head.
Great. So another question directly for you, Bhavin. Wonderful presentation. This is Martin Woolman, who's saying, wonderful presentation, wonderful project, congratulations. He wants to ask you the following. Which were your major learnings during the curating process is one. Second, will the project continue with another exhibition?
Hi, Martin. Wonderful seeing you here, and thank you for the question. It's true. One of the major challenges, I think, as a curator is the challenge of the narrative. what story to tell, and how do you string these different photographs or these different objects in a piece that tells something. So that I think is so fundamentally challenging that even to think that not to take a stand is also a stand is a very different approach to it. So I think to me personally, that was a constant challenge at every step. Should I make a narrative? Should I not make a narrative? That was the challenge that I was facing as a curator. And as for the exhibition, the structure is definitely there. I mean, in a sense, the physical structure is there with me. We initially thought we would take the same exhibition to 3 cities, but unfortunately, we were only able to manage it with 2 because of time and budget. But yeah, I mean, one day, hopefully, maybe.
Thank you, Bhavin. So we will wait for some other questions. But in between, I wanted to ask you as in terms of your, Bhavin, your understanding and your entry point to the archive as an architect, as you know very well that architecture in its practice and essence is an exercise in future. It envisions, it talks about, it constructs, it builds for future. Now here's an architect who is looking at the past and bringing that to present. And in a way, you talked about the structural potential and the portability of your exhibition design as an architect. So I wanted to know that you talked about the baggages and the biases of the archives as well. So what were your own biases as an architect? What was the entry point? How does an architect enter an archive? What happens between the architect and the archive? What kind of dialogue takes place when an architect who's predominantly looking at the future but enters a repository, and this very peculiar one, which has to do with the everyday life of the city? What is the kind of dialogue that forges, and what is the semantics of that dialogue?
It's a very, very important question, and I can only answer this as a reflective thing, and because I have not come across any studies that have actually shown what processes people follow, but as a reflective thing, the architects, or at least the training of the architect, is very, very visual in its training. So when I see photographs, I not only begin by looking at the composition of how the subject is placed, to what proportions it is, but I then also start looking at its context as to where this building or where this surrounding sort of exists. And from that, you can automatically sort of decode certain clues of uh, of and of things like building materials. Like, as if you see brick and if you see it being used in a certain way, you can probably place it that this is the place where these kinds of things are happening. And so to understand that, I think as an architect, the entry point is purely visual, and it's a very difficult relation that way, because we as architects do use history, because we borrow heavily from history. In a sense, every future aspiration has a historical understanding as to what was the identity of this place, what is the context of this city, what has happened, and so on and so forth. So we definitely do look at archives, but there is a projection in time, which you very outrightly put forth, that it is a projection. The design is for the future, but you definitely do look at the past. So it's always this back and forth relation. If I don't know, I mean, it's that's the only.
That's perfectly understood. We have a question from Bhavin Shukla, who asks you can you share something around the disparity between the rich and poor, and how middle class started evolving? I think he means by looking at the pictures, how did the middle class, is there any clue about how life was evolving in Delhi?
I think Surajit, you should take up this one. It's
Well, I see Bhavin is playing clever here. He's throwing the ball into Surajit's court.
no.
Yeah, Surajit, come on. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you want, Bhavin, do you want to take it?
So the thing is, like what Surjit was saying, that photography as a medium came to India first a little later than where it was invented in France. In India, only people who had access to a camera picked it up early on. So and I'm just talking from the things that we've seen in the archive, is that the kind of family photographs that you sort of see, they're family occasions, gatherings, but like what Surjit was saying, that they are probably of the upper class or of the elite for that matter, and that today feels very ordinary. So what was elite back then today is commonplace. But how this this middle class of uh, sort of evolved, I don't know if Surajit can help sort of decipher some more clues out of this.
All I would like to add to that is, like, looking at the photographs alone, you can't kind of describe the process by which this evolution takes place. You can definitely see an evolution. If you know something about the city in which these photographs are done, you will be able to notice the parts of the city in which this evolution can take place, has been taking place, and then reading up about or discovering from other sources information about those parts of the city, then you can start adding things together to tell the larger story of how the city kind of gentrified itself, if I can call it that.
Right.
And push the people who weren't gentry enough into the corners.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Tanvi, just to add on to that, because
Go ahead, please.
That's very, very, very crucial, that you can see that happening. And what was gentrified back then is now also part of Delhi and expensive properties. So the photographs of housing in Rohini, where the plotting scheme sort of, or some other things that is now also part of Delhi. And so
yeah,
it's
great. So there is a question from Anupama Bharti, who wants you to share. Would you also like to talk about the open vernacular spaces of Delhi of that era, which must have beautiful memories associated with the people, like Galib Ki Haveli and so on?
I guess I'll take this one to start with, Bhavin, so don't get...
Oh, wow. Well, there's always a first. Yeah.
What I would just like to tell Anupama is that, and others as well, is that as you ask me this question, I am thinking about the kind of comments people have made either while giving the photographs or on seeing these photographs during our shows, the way when we share it in the neighborhood museums or otherwise. One of the topics that have come up for people when you're looking at photographs of Delhi in, like, say 1970 and earlier, one word that comes up time and again is hunting. Most of us who live in Delhi today can't imagine that the grounds of the city, which is now all built up, was once a major hunting ground for not just partridges, quail, and birds, but also it was jackals, cheetahs, wild. There was also what is Lakarbaga? Oh God. Anyway, so there are a fair amount of wild animals, and there is, in fact, then we discover stories from places like Mehrauli, which is urban, and rural Delhi, where people talk about how somebody in the neighborhood, maybe the next house, and one person's own sister was picked up by a wolf. And because people came running out, was dropped about 20 feet away, and the animal ran off. And all of this is happening in 1960 in Delhi. So Delhi has this kind of juxtaposition of real wild, forested land with the urban happening at almost 60 years ago, a process that still continues. I mean, till 20 years back, there was this whole thing about the monkey man and stuff like that, because monkeys are a disaster in Delhi. I mean, ask anyone who lives in Delhi and they'll tell you some part, they overrun the place. And they also no longer the monkeys who behave like they are in the wild. They've got urbanized. They know how to handle urban life. So when you're talking about memories of the times like Galib Ki Haveli, what these pictures tell you is about hunting. They tell you about festive, flower arrangements like Sirgutti, which I was very personally struck by. Small jasmine flowers used in a myriad of ways as ornamentation and jewelry, not just for marriages, but for everyday use. And which reminded me immediately of Maligai from Tamil Nadu. And I'm thinking, Delhi did this all over in 1950, 1940, and we have pictures to show it. So it's very unusual kind of storytelling of Delhi that tells us about what a more easygoing pace of life and a more relaxed urbanism could be like. Quite different from what it is now.
Yeah. So I think, the questions have, I hope the audience, if the audience member, any of you have questions, please shoot away. So in between, perhaps to you, Surajit and Bhavin also, the question of a photo archive. Because we know that the perennial burden on the photography is the burden of the misrepresentation. And you talked about in the beginning of your presentation, Surajit, you spoke about that how the family members of the people who were in the photograph came running to you and said, please don't display it. So in terms of an archive, what is the ethical responsibility when the field of the photography, because we are not talking about the canonized photographs or the photographs where a consensus, however spoken or not spoken, or consent has been given, whether written or oral or in verbal form. Here are photographs of the people who may not know where they ultimately landed, where the photograph is right now. And this is a question which is happening currently also on the social media. There's a proliferation of people taking photographs around the life. And the questions of ethics are being discussed at a larger platform of what right does the person who is being photographed have? What say does he or she have when the photograph lands on social media or in an archive? So what is the responsibility? How does the archive deal with this dilemma of ethics in terms of having the predominantly photo archive of the people, perhaps without metadata in most of the cases?
If I can kind of just, it's a very live question for us, because it's a question that one is even handling today.
Right.
Literally in Delhi, because when we are doing these local exhibitions, part of the reason we do them is we are very concerned that the photos that we collect shouldn't turn around and bite either the person who's doing the collection or the university as an institution, right? So as a result, part of our process of collection is also showing it right there where we've collected it. Put yourself in the shoes of the person who's given you the photograph. Would you want to step back and look at the photograph you've just given and think it's all right? But however much we want to treat it as a hypothetical question, it's never the same as actually just seeing it there. And that's what most people are like. Through trial and error, not just in Delhi, but elsewhere, one has found that openness to sharing not just is useful in kind of helping us formulate guidelines for ways to kind of control visibility of those photographs if needed, one, and secondly, also, if people like the fact that these photographs, I mean, people share them for a reason. And if people find that the reason they shared it with are ones you kind of, your reason and their reason converge, they're actually willing to share more. And that's part of the reason we also do this whole exercise of this whole process of sharing. It's not just about consent and ethics. It's also about, do you want to share more? Finally, the final test of a photo archive is, does it help people want to share more?
So it's a lot of trust building, you're saying.
Yep. It is. It's essentially trust building.
Yes.
Tanvi, sorry, I just wanted to add on to that, and this is coming from a very recent perspective that I have here, is that more than and I'm not denying that we as an archive, they don't have ethical responsibility. For sure they do. But at first, I think in India, we need to build more archives and more documentations, because we simply don't have that much. I mean, I'm currently in Germany, and the amount of documentation that exists is phenomenal. So I'm hopeful that let's first build these wonderful spaces, and then and at the same time keep engaging with conversations of ethical responsibility, for sure. Yeah.
Bhavin, there is a specific question from you, from Mr. Bhavin Shukla. What changes would you recommend to this project as it pertains to garnering more interest from young generations who consume media differently? This is especially for you.
Yeah, it's a very, very relevant question, because that's the question of relevance, as to how do these photographs maintain their relevance. Why should I be interested in some family album 50 years before me or something? That's the question of relevance. Why should I look at it today? And I think even the current media, that is Instagram, Facebook, that we're using very differently, I'm at least very hopeful in a certain sense, because there is a space within that thing where there is almost like a resurgence of the analog. Like, it's going back again. The vinyl record for music is coming out. The film camera is again coming back in demand. But again, of course, it's going up. It's more expensive to buy a film camera now than to buy a digital camera. So it's this crazy wave that we're riding. But that would be my I'm at least very hopeful that with new media, more access to such visual material, I think we will be able to have a more wider conversation about this.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think that's it. Yeah, it's wonderful. So, we are, I think, past the stipulated time that we had kept for the presentation. And I would, Bhavin and Surajit, like to thank you for these insightful presentations and the conversations that followed. And also, I'm very grateful to the audience members who stayed with us throughout. And I would also want to announce that at IFA, we organize these project showcases every month. And the next one is going to be towards the end of the April. You will receive an invitation from us. And if you are not on our Facebook or Insta page, please like our Facebook and Insta page, follow us there to know about the projects that we support and to also receive information about the work we do. I have the last note to kind of, it's an appeal from us, from IFA. As you know, we have been in the arts, we support arts. And without the support of the people, our well-wishers, donors, projects like Bhavin's and collaborations like Surajit's and IFA's collaboration would never be possible. It's impossible to think. And today is the last day of the March, which is the fiscal year comes to an end. And we have circulated an appeal via our social media pages and via email to all our well-wishers and friends of IFA and donors who help us constantly to realize projects like these. We request you that there is still some time, there are a few hours left to make your year-end contribution to IFA. And it could be as humble as 250 Indian rupees and as generous as it could get. My colleague Darshana will share the link in the chat box, and you can click on that link. I'm going to stay live for 1 minute so that you have the time to click on that link. If you are unable to do it here, you can also donate at the IFA website or find the link through any of our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Please support the arts and donate to IFA. Thank you very much, Bhavin. Thank you, Surajit, Suman, and everybody else who helped to put together this presentation. It was really wonderful to have you. I will stay back for a minute, as I have said. If you wish to, you can go off because you might have other engagements as well. Or if you want to say something towards the end, we would love to hear that as well.
Just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity and for making this presentation and hearing some of these questions. Really, thank you.
Thank
You're
you
welcome.
again. Same here. Thank you so much. Okay, bye.